Good morning, everybody. I'm Christine O'Connor. I'm one of the two co-chairs of the Zoning and Planning Committee. And Ian, who is admitting people, is the other co-chair. And he's going to be handling questions and conversations and the participants. Meanwhile, I'd like to just go over some of INC's ground rules. And I think we did this at the last meeting. Loretta went over them, and we're going to try to do them at the beginning of every meeting. But we're going to make sure everybody's respectful of both the people who are presenting and all the other participants in the meeting, and try to have everybody refrain from interrupting and just mute yourself for the bulk of the presentation. And then we'll get to the questions at the end of the presentation. Please don't use vulgar or abusive language or anything that violates our INC policies of inclusivity. And don't show any images on the screen that would offend other attendees. Since these are public meetings and they're open to anybody who's interested in the topic, we would just want to make sure that you know we are recording, and if there are comments in the chat that are inappropriate, Ian will end the chat, and then you'll have to submit I guess you can still submit them, but Ian will read the ones that are not offensive. And the meeting will also be up in about a week. So
Can I jump in really quick?
Yes.
Can I jump in here real quick? I just want to say good morning to everybody and ask if you could to go in and rename yourself to tell us what neighborhood you're from. And I would love to see if you're a delegate of INC as well. I think it's always great to see a mix of people from the community, some delegates and some not.
And I'm trying to get to my front page. There it is. There's our mission, INC's mission to advocate, to bring citizens together and to empower neighborhood organizations. So I just want to bring your attention to the bottom, to the non-discrimination policy, because if anything is said in the chat that violates our non-discrimination policy, we will have to end the chat. Okay, Ian, are you still admitting, or should we give it a few more minutes?
I think you're good to go ahead.
Okay. So I will stop my share. And we're going to start this morning with a presentation on the residential rental licensing policy that Councilwoman Gilmore and her staff, including her chief of staff, Megan, have been working on for quite some time, since 2019. And we're going to get a presentation on that. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. So it'd be really good if people could put what you do in the chat is in question format and sort of doesn't repeat other people's questions, so Ian can go through and ask them of the presenters when we're done. So I'd like to introduce Councilwoman Stacy Gilmore to kick us off. Thank you so much, you and Megan, for being here today.
Well, good morning, everybody, and happy Saturday. And I'm Councilwoman Stacy Gilmore, and thank you, Christine and Ian, for the invitation to come and present this morning. And I've got Megan Alens on with us as well. She has really helped do the research and a lot of the work around this ordinance that we're proposing. And we presented in the Budget and Policy Committee on January 28th. And I see that the link was shared out, but we're going to go ahead and go through the presentation here for all of you joining us this morning. And Megan's going to drive for me here. And, you know, as Christine said, my council office, we started this work back in early 2019. And, you know, we were in an affordable housing crisis back then, but now in February, almost March of 2021, And with the compounded effects of COVID-19, we are looking at historic numbers of people facing housing instability. And this rental license program is called Healthy Residential Rentals for All, and it would create the largest single license pool in the city and county of Denver with over 54,000 eligible rental licensees. The idea behind a rental registry or licensure program is to gather basic information to know how many rentals you have in your city. Right now, if I was to ask Britta Fisher or anybody in the city, hey, run me a report of how many rentals we have in the entire city, or drill down and tell me how many we have in each council district, we couldn't do that today within the city and county of Denver because we don't have a way to track rentals in our city. And so this would ensure, one, that we know how many rentals we have. We would know that they all meet the basic minimum housing standards. They would comply with our zoning codes. And ideally, we would use this data that we would collect to improve outreach and our programs that support folks who are renting, and make sure that we have a mechanism to get that information out to them. And at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that folks stay housed. And the timeline that we have been working on, like I said, April 2019 was when we kicked this work off. And my council office began facilitating meetings with excise and licensing, community planning and development, Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. And it was sort of hot potato because it was like, where is this rental license going to live within the city and county of Denver? And so we needed to work through that with the agencies, and it will be a partnership between excise and licensing and Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. And we held stakeholder meetings in 2019 into 2020. And in the summer of 2020, we finally started to get folks to come together around this idea and proposal. Met with the mayor and his office a few times because we knew that we were going to need software improvements. We were going to have administrative costs as far as licensing technicians to get this rental licensure up. And so we got the backing of the administration to put dollars towards the kickoff of this program through the 2021 budget process of council. And so the mayor allocated about $392,000 for the initial rental software and setup for this program once the ordinance is passed. And we have draft ordinance language now, but right now we're in the second phase through stakeholder outreach. And ideally, we would like to be in the biz committee of council in April with final passage of this ordinance in May of this year. And we have been working with a stakeholder team, and it includes Councilwoman Torres, Elevation Land Trust, Healthier Colorado, Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, Enterprise Community Partners. We worked a lot with the city of Boulder because they have a long-standing rental licensure program. And so some of the components of this Denver proposal, you'll see that it's modeled after Boulder's proposal, and then lots of city agencies. And so now we're doing the second phase through public engagement of the stakeholder process. So I talked a little bit about the problem that we're solving for, that we currently don't know how many rentals we have in our city. And especially when you think of all the single family homes, duplexes, townhomes, condos that are out there being rented out, it's critical that we know our housing stock. And many times renters are afraid to report problems in their homes. They might have landlords who are slow to correct major life safety issues, or they might live without leases, creating uncertainty and having limited legal recourse in the event of a rent increase. And so at the end of the day, this rental license will accomplish three things for us. One, we'll be able to ensure as a city that Chapter 27, Article 2 of our Denver Revised Municipal Code ensure that rentals in our city meet the minimum housing standards and that they've been maintained even if they were built years or decades ago. We'll be able to track our housing stock and have good data on that. And we've been in a housing crisis. And so we need to create mechanisms where it's easy for us as a city to pull a report, know exactly who owns a property, who's responsible for that property, and how to reach out to them, that there's good information for those individuals. And the other pieces that this rental license will benefit is beyond the data, we will also be able to have the information of property ownership around zoning issues. And so if there is a home that there are zoning issues going on or neighborhood inspection issues going on, usually NIS would send a letter to the property. Well, if it's renters, they might not feel like they need to do anything with that. They might not give it to the landlord. They might not really have good communication with the landlord. And so this residential license would take that step out of it. We would know exactly who owns that property, that they're licensed or not, and how we can communicate with them. We will also this program will also support the residential home program within the Denver Department of Public Health and Environment. And they currently ensure the health and safety of homes in our city. And so we will have that contact information. If there's an egregious violation, we will know exactly who to reach out to get that fixed. We need lots of different tools in host toolbox to enhance renter protections and to provide stability in our housing. And this will help us do that. And a rental license program is specifically named in Housing and Inclusive Denver plan from 2018. And this will also help our climate office, their goals around energy efficiency. In the current proposal, we don't have any criteria or requirements for landlords or property owners to implement energy efficiencies now, but this ordinance sets it up so that in the future, we would be able to include on our minimum housing standards checklist questions about what are the age of your appliances? What energy efficiencies have you as a landlord or a property owner implemented to ensure that your tenants aren't maybe paying extra in utilities because a landlord has failed to put in proper energy efficiencies in that unit. And so I'm going to dig down into the data a little bit here. And so when I started out, we know that we've estimated about half of Denver's housing stock is potentially rentals. And we knew that we needed to drill down into that initial estimate that we had gotten from the American Fact Finder in 2017. And so what Megan was able to do was we worked with the assessor's office and took data from 2019, and we were able to determine that about 37% of Denver's housing stock is made up of rentals. And the way that we did that was that we took the assessor's physical addresses that they had and compared them to the owner's addresses. And so that's how we were able to drill down a bit further and estimate that through our calculations, about 37% of Denver's housing stock are made up of rentals. But it's not good enough that we might have 50%, we might have 37%. We really need to know exactly what we have. And so looking at this chart, we have about 26,000 single family homes that are rentals, about 16,000 that are condos, about 6,000 that are row homes. And then with apartments, we needed to really look at it in a different way. And so we knew right away we couldn't license per unit due to the numbers of apartments. And so we determined that we would license by parcels. And that licensing through parcels, that gave us approximately 6,600 parcels in the city that have apartment multi-dwelling units on them. And so this could be an apartment complex with multiple buildings or one apartment. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide here. Perfect. And so licensing through the parcels creates more equity and streamlines this process so that we're not we're not creating unintended consequences through this policy that there would be more licenses and fees required for an apartment complex that might have multiple building addresses but is under one complex versus a singular building that could have the same amount of units. And we'll show you some examples of what we're talking about later on in the presentation. And so I'm going to go through this pretty quick here so we can honor the time that you have allowed for us and hopefully take some questions from folks as well. And so really we're looking at a 3-part phasing of this program. The first phase would be in January of 2022, and that would be early licensing for anyone in the city. And then the second phase would start January 1, 2022, and that would be for 2 or more rental dwelling units on a parcel. And so you can see there it includes apartment buildings, apartment complexes, condo units, and row homes. And then the third phase would be where we bring in single rental dwelling units on a single parcel. And the reason we're phasing in multi-dwelling first is based on feedback from our stakeholder working group. Apartments and apartment complexes are businesses that have the capacity to comply with this important initiative with management teams many times in state. And single family homes and rentals that may have out-of-state owners are going to require more education and outreach to ensure that these rentals comply. And the license is going to be a 4-year license will be renewable every 4 years. And the 4-year term is really built on Boulder's rental licensure program. And the only reason that 4-year mark would change is if ownership changes. And so looking at the application and license fees, we intentionally kept the fees low to encourage compliance and to mitigate any concerns of involuntary displacement due to overburdensome fees. And so you can see here, the application fee is $50. And during phase 1, if you opt in early, it's going to be half off at $25 for all types of rentals. And then in phase 2 and phase 3, depending on which are required in phase 2. So if you have a multi-unit complex, your application fee would go up to $50 in phase 2. And then in phase 3, everybody will be required to pay the $50 application fee to license their rental. And then the license fees per the dwelling units, you can see on the bottom chart there, we tried to keep it intentionally low, again, not to create involuntary displacement. And at the end of the day, encourage compliance through this very large license that we're going to have in the city. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide here. And so we wanted to walk you through a couple of examples. And so the first example is a single family home that comes in during the early licensing phase, and they would be half off on the application fee. So instead of $50, it'd be $25, and adding the license fee of $50 for one unit would give a total cost of $75. And again, that's renewable every 4 years. The next example is one apartment building on a single parcel that's in phase 2. So now they'd be required to license. Therefore, they'd have a $50 application fee and a cost of $350 for the license because of their 200 units. And the final example is an apartment complex with 3 buildings, but all on a single parcel with the same 200 units as the previous example. And you can see that it'd be the same total cost. Again, we wanted to make this equitable so that apartment complexes that have the same number of units as a single apartment building on a parcel would be charged the same amount. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan, and she's going to take us through a few more of these slides, and then we're happy to take any questions.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry. So this policy would require an inspection requirement in order to obtain a license, and a new inspection would be required every 4 years or unless ownership changes. We mirrored Boulder's rental license model when it came to inspectors, where an owner or manager will need to find a certified private home inspector to conduct the rental inspections. The owner pays the inspector directly, and the inspector will have a city-created checklist based off of our Chapter 27, Article 2 minimum housing standards. This allows the landlord to schedule their own inspections and not have to wait on the city. The average cost we got from Boulder for an inspection of a single-family home was about $150. And we're setting this up intentionally so that property owners, managers can shop around. We found about 6,000 metro area housing inspector options. And this way they won't have to be reliant on a city process. We think this also will be a great workforce opportunity as well for residents who are looking for flexible hours. And hopefully, as we go through this process, we can partner with DITO to create a pipeline for housing inspection certification programs. So continuing on with the inspection requirement, unlike Boulder's model, who inspects every unit, we knew that would be too burdensome for rental operators in Denver. So we are requiring that 2 or more rental units on a single parcel are only required to inspect 20% of the units at random. So the inspector will choose those at random on the day of inspection. If less than 5 units, then at least 1 unit must be inspected. And then 1 unit for single rental units on a single parcel are required to also be inspected to obtain a license. To ensure housing in Denver complies with Chapter 27, Article 2 of our minimum housing standards, we will continue to utilize DDPHE's residential health program while the city recovers from COVID-19 impacts, and will continue to use it for complaint-based issues within the residential rentals. So currently, this program takes about 1,200 annual complaints, and these, from what we've heard from DDPHE, are really egregious cases, and we've had examples of this in our own district. The 2 pictures on the right here is a Green Valley Ranch home last year that a family with children rented kind of sight unseen because they were having trouble finding a house with the number of bedrooms they needed. And so finally found one, was really grateful, but walked in and realized there's live wires exposed on the floor. There's a cockroach and mold under the sink there. So these are really the cases that go to DDPHE right now in this program. And again, just to restate what Councilwoman Gilmore said earlier, many times renters may be afraid to report these problems with their homes and have landlords who are slow to correct major life and safety issues, or even live without leases. So there's many homes and many tenants who are probably just not even reporting issues currently. So the application and license portal would look very similar to the short-term rental portal if anyone has used that. It would require property owners, managers, and landlords to provide some basic information and legally attest to the compliance of Chapter 27, Article 2 minimum housing standards. And that would just be confirmed through proof of a passing inspection. And again, the application fee that you would submit when you do this process just covers the administrative costs that excise and license has to do to kind of check to make sure you didn't put a picture of a kitten versus your license, which has happened before, they've told us. So, and then exemptions from this licensure program from the total program would be on-campus college housing, boarding homes, short-term rentals, and commercial lodging. This is because they all have their own licensure process. Exempt from the application and license fees, but still must obtain a license and show proof of inspection would be rental properties owned in whole or in part or leased and operated by any governmental agency. So an example of this would be our Denver Housing Authority. We'd still like them to identify where those rental units are, just to track that data, but not charging those fees and application and license fees. And then exempt from the inspection requirement, we took this from another peer city, but we would give exemptions for inspection requirements for new builds less than 4 years old, just because they've already been through a process of inspection when they were built. And then penalties and disciplinary hearings. So this ordinance would utilize standard license language for penalties and hearing process. For fines, it would be the same as other license programs where the director may fine a licensee not to exceed $1,000 per violation. And then they would have up to 30 days to pay that. And then for hearings, the director could suspend or revoke licenses if previously issued a violation through a standard investigation and hearing process. And then I will pass it back to Councilwoman Gilmore for the last slide.
All right, well, thank you, Megan. And so as I had talked about earlier in the presentation, during City Council's budget process late last year, we had all agreed to put in a request to fulfill the initial budget costs that would be required to set this program up. And so we have about $392,000 identified. And once this ordinance passes, we will start the work to update our Acela software to make sure that we've got everything in place to kick this program off January 1st of 2022. And wanted to also talk a little bit about, we have our short-term rentals licensure program in the city and county of Denver. And so it really struck me that we are ensuring for visitors and tourists to our city that when they rent a short-term rental, that one, it's licensed, two, the owner has self-certified that minimum housing standards are in place for those units. And we have that entire licensure program for visitors and tourists to our cities, but we don't have anything for Denver residents who actually reside in our city and happen to rent. We don't have any sort of assurances that where they're living meets the minimum housing standards. And I know with the slide deck, we've got, and this is also, we can send it over, but Megan, if you wouldn't mind, if we could go ahead and go to the next slide and go down into the appendix a little bit more, that would be awesome. And so we've got our timeline here. We have a pretty extensive outreach plan as well, but I wanted to show the heat map of where we have identified that we have single family rentals in our city. And you can see that this is purely an estimate because we don't have good data again to confirm this, but this is an estimate that we have. And so we've got a lot of single family rentals throughout the city, and there's no mechanism for us to have contact information for those property owners if there's an issue, or on the flip side, if we as a city just want to share information out with them. For example, the temporary rent and utilities program or eviction defense supports for the city. We don't have a way to get that information out to those renters. And then the next slide here If you could go one more. These are the minimum housing standards in our Denver Revised Municipal Code. And so it talks about, safe entry, safe exit points. It talks about ensuring that the water supply is appropriate, that there's ventilation, lighting. And so it's really the basic minimum housing standards that would be part of the checklist that would be created in partnership with Denver Department of Public Health and Environment and Excise and Licensing and stakeholders during the rulemaking process after we pass this ordinance. And so with that, we can go ahead and take this down, and happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
Thank you, Council President Gilmore. Really appreciate the presentation. I had a chance to watch it when you were in committee as well. And thanks to Megan, seeing you working on this for a while. I do see some questions here about process and who was engaged in your original stakeholding. I know that was a slide from previously, so maybe we could just go straight to that slide. I do want to also just share that we had a chance to meet with both Christine and I with Council President Gilmore as she was working through this. And we did notify you all that this was something that was coming. It was even connected to some of our group living requests that we had sent forward to the city. And then from there, I think after that slide, I put in the list who I have. I think Emmett was the first one to ask questions. So I'd love to have Emmett ask his question.
All right.
Hey,
Great.
everyone.
Oh, do you want us to go ahead and bring up the slide?
Yeah, will you show the slide first, and then Emmett, can you go after that?
Sure.
All right. Yeah, we had a 20 plus group part of our stakeholder outreach. And so, these are the organizations that we had started working with, along with Excise and Licensing, Community Planning and Development. We have the host office for housing stability, Denver Department of Public Health and Environment, and then the mayor's office included on it. And we're right now in the public outreach phase. And so we're talking with a lot of apartment complexes, apartment owners, et cetera. And Megan, thank you, Megan. These are all of the organizations that we are now in the process of reaching out to and gathering feedback from them on how we, can take their input and then craft the final ordinance language. All right, thanks, Megan.
Mhm.
Can you put that back up one more time? Sorry about that.
Sure thing. Let's see. There you go.
May I ask a question about one? Is CRL and Associates on there because they represent owners or apartment buildings, or I'm curious about them? That was the first one that caught my eye.
They
Yeah.
represent the Apartment Association of Metro Denver, so maybe they should have been a slash, but the table doesn't give me a lot of room on the slide. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Go for it, Emmett.
Go ahead, Emmett.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the process. Isn't there a rental process in the state of Colorado and Denver, Colorado already? And what is why is this needed to enhance that? And we started talking about minimal fees, and the next thing we got to was inspections and paying inspectors, and we already have an inspection group that can't handle the problems they have already. So why are we compounding the problem? And why are we putting all these laws and fees and processes on the very people that can't afford it? That's my question.
Great question. Thank you, Emmett. We really appreciate that. And Right now, we don't have a rental licensure process within the city. There is no requirement. If you want to rent a property in our city, you don't need to do anything other than put a for rent sign out and make sure that you're following, around just the requirements of being, making sure that there's a lease, and it's very minimal, but the city doesn't manage or require anything around that. And we purposely kept the fees, both the application and the license fee, very, very low, so that it wouldn't ding the very folks that are maybe having a rental property to help them also turn around and pay their house mortgage. But we also want to ensure that we're protecting renters' rights and renters' living situations, and that our rental properties are meeting the minimum housing standards. And really, the only way that you get action is if something is so egregious, like we showed you in the pictures from that Green Valley Ranch home, to get Denver Department of Public Health and Environment to come in and look at that. And, that property that we had in Green Valley Ranch, it took about 7 months for the city to ensure that that property was cleaned up and that it was safe to be, lived in, bare minimum, not even beyond renting it out to somebody else. And so we're really trying to, at the end of the day, ensure that anybody who rents in the city and county of Denver, there's a mechanism to ensure that the property is meeting our minimum housing standards, and we know how to contact the owner. And so, you brought up 311. And when folks call in about properties in the neighborhood, and you're maybe turning that property over to neighborhood inspections, when neighborhood inspections comes in, they look at the property, and then most likely they send a letter right to that property, because there's no way for neighborhood inspections to identify, is that property a rental property, or is that property owner occupied? And so we need to get that information so that we can solve the problems in our communities in a more efficient manner, and then make sure that we're not putting more stress on folks who are renting, saying, oh, geez, I got this letter. What am I supposed to do? My landlord lives in California, or it's a mortgage company, and I don't have the bandwidth or the time to sit on the phone on a 1-800 line calling a mortgage company to tell them that they got this letter from the city. And so really this rental licensure program will create a streamlined communication stream for the city.
I just wanted to add to that, Emmett, you mentioned 311 inspectors. This program would not utilize neighborhood inspections. This would utilize private inspectors. So people who own a rental would have to go out and find a home inspector, just like the home inspectors that you get when you buy a home. They have the same training that's required and certified them to inspect a home, and they would get a city checklist based off of those Article 2 standards that says, there's no mold, there's a fire extinguisher, and they're basically just checking through that checklist and sign off on it. So I just wanted to clarify that point.
I know there's other people in line, so I don't want to.
Jean Granville was next, actually.
I think you're on mute.
Jean, you're muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just lost everything. I had a couple of questions, but my first one is how are you going to really connect with out-of-state landlords? We've been trying to do that for years for this place, Sun Valley, and get nothing and have not really gotten any help from the city on it either. So if ever anything needs to get to some kind of health compliance, that's it. But so I'm just wondering what will be different if you just have out-of-state landlord property owners that are just non-responsive.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. Thank you. And great question. We are talking about, there's a variety of ways. One, we have the tax assessors information. And so we've talked about, in the past, my council office, we worked with the Department of Finance to get a flyer put into all of the property tax bills that are mailed out in January of each year. And we've done that in the past through the property tax relief program, the temporary rent and utilities assistance program. And it's an added sheet in that mailing that goes out to all property owners for them to pay their property tax. We've given them additional information. And so we would, once this passes, make sure that we include information about the rental licensure program in all the property tax invoices that go out from the city. And so even if you're out of state and you own property in Denver, you got to pay your property taxes. And so that's one mechanism where we would get that information to out of state owners. And the idea with single family and duplexes and triplexes is that it's going to take us a little bit of time to make sure that we're communicating with all of those single dwelling property owners. And so that's why we put the single family dwellings in the third phase, so that essentially gives us 2 years to reach out to all of them and get good compliance. But we know that it's going to be a heavy lift, but we've got that, if you own property in Denver, you've got to pay your property taxes. And then if somebody doesn't comply, we can actually ask them to stop renting their property in the city and county of Denver until they get a license. But we've put protections in the ordinance that we're not looking to have a property owner evict anybody. We just want them to comply at the end of the day.
So I just had one other clarification that I think I might have missed. Thank you for that answer. That was helpful. Does this apply to a property owner that lives in their home and just wants to take in a roommate and rent out, one of their rooms? This would be for an actual rental property that's more of a commercial venture.
Sure. So this wouldn't cover rooms for rent or anything along those lines. So that wouldn't be managed in this rental licensure program. It would be if you're renting the entire unit or dwelling.
And then I just have one other thing is that I hope affordable housing, maybe the government agencies like DHA don't need to pay fees, but we do have non-compliant affordable housing. And if there is ever a renter that is afraid to speak up, those are the units they're afraid to speak up in. So I hope that there's some oversight that is a little bit more diligent for those units.
Thank you very much. We're continuing to hear from folks about what exemptions we're looking to allow, but point well taken that we've got to make sure that we're ensuring that there are inspections on those units as well.
Thank you.
And then I just wanted to add as well, since this is the zoning committee, that an ADU would be, if you're renting your ADU in your backyard, that would count as a separate rental. So just FYI.
Yeah, thanks, Megan.
Run your meeting.
There was an important note here that just got dropped in by Tina Axelrad. She says she wants to just be clear that the Community Planning and Development is not the enforcing agency in this proposed rental registry program. Zoning neighborhood inspectors will still enforce general property maintenance issues like junk, outdoor storage, weeds, snow, and the like. That property maintenance jurisdiction will not extend to this program.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Tina.
And Miles, I had you next.
Hi, thank you.
Carla.
Oops. Go ahead, Christine.
I think it was Carla, wasn't it, on the list? No? Oh, Miles, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Council President Gilmore and Megan for the presentation. It looks like you've done quite a rollout, and I like that you're looking at unintended consequences management, and it was very thoughtful. And I like the idea of tracking and monitoring rentals through this licensing. I think it'll be helpful in understanding Denver's demographics as it changes and what the status is at the moment. But I've got some questions about the compliance part. How will inspectors investigate non-compliance? Will it be from complaints? And how that process might work? Will staff be investigating if there's supposed non-compliance? Will more resources be provided? And then just a few other questions. Can you tell me some of the greatest challenges in creating this new ordinance, as well as what pushback you've had from the public? That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Miles, and thank you for your great questions. Around compliance, really, we're looking at compliance from a licensing technician standpoint. And so we're trying to avoid having to send folks out. And, we've got a lot of tools within the city to make sure that we have compliance. And so it would be, say, for example, we, again, once we get this ordinance passed, we, on an annual basis, I'm imagining, we would do a look at the assessor's information and compare that against properties and determine what properties are not yet into compliance. And so we will be able to do some of our due diligence behind the scenes, but really this would be through excise and licensing. And so as they manage short-term rentals and ensure that there's compliance through the short-term rentals program, we would look at a similar sort of model. And so if somebody is renting a property and say, for example, they missed that there was a requirement in the city to license their single family home if they're renting it, there would be a notice given, and then they would have a period of time to cure. And so we would allow them time to, get their information into the system, get a housing inspection scheduled, maybe show that there is a housing inspection scheduled, and we'll work with them. We're, not trying to just ding folks. We want to make sure that we get good compliance around this program. And so really there'll be tools within excise and licensing to do that. But if for whatever reason, somebody after they've been noticed says, you know what, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to get my property into the, license database, et cetera, then we do have the regular hearing process that would be, kicked off with excise and licensing, and that property owner would be required to go before excise and licensing and explain what was going on. And if they didn't want to comply, we would have the ability by law to tell them that they are not allowed to rent their property in the city and county of Denver. And so, it really followed the regular path that we already do in the city for short-term rentals. If there's a violation with any of our licenses, there's already a process established in the city to do that. And remind me your other question, because I know it was a really good one, Miles. I think your last question.
Some of it was, what is the greatest, two of them was, what were the greatest challenges in working on the new ordinance, and what were the general pushback areas that you've heard about? Thank you.
Right on. Thank you. Yeah, the everybody that we've really talked to is just like, this makes good sense. Like, this is logical. We need this information as a city to make policy decisions. I mean, we talk a lot about affordable housing in our city, and I have a science background. I'm super analytical. And the way I look at solving problems is, what's the data? What are we working with right now? And get a baseline. And we as a city, we don't even know how many rental properties we have in our city. That seems like a super important data point that we need to have to inform and influence our policies around housing. And so, that's one of the pieces that I think are super important. And we've got a lot of great support from community members, from, different special interest groups, the community. I presented this in our neighborhood. The pushback are from folks that, maybe rent or maybe represent hundreds of units, and this is a new concept for them. And so there's a certain amount of apprehension around what this will truly mean. And we just want to hear from folks what their concerns are so that we can start to problem solve around that. But really, that's been the only pushback initially are from very large apartment complexes where they're just saying, hey, we already do our stuff. We already know that it's safe for people to live here. We don't need to do anything else. And so we're trying to alleviate those concerns that it will be overly burdensome, and work with them to just hear what their thoughts are on how we can craft this and not have negative unintended consequences on down the road.
Okay, Lucia, I believe you're next. And I just want to time check folks and let them know we have about 9 minutes left here. And by my count, I see 5 or 6 speakers. So I'm hopefully we can get to everyone. If you could just ask one question when it's your turn, it'd be great to let everyone else get a chance to ask theirs.
Hi, so, I feel like what I said in the comments is that, most landlords are not slumlords. Most landlords are trying to do the right thing. They're running a business. And, if you get a reputation as a slumlord, you're not going to get good tenants. So, some of the stuff has already been answered, but, just because you have this inspection system isn't going to suddenly make these tenants who are afraid to turn people in suddenly want to turn people in, because now it's a licensing thing. I think that it could go in as a voluntary program, which is something that Emmett suggested as a rollout to begin with. And then you can use that as a selling point for your rental property. Fully licensed, rental, we get inspected, and that's your thing. And if not, then, well, if I'm a tenant, I don't want to do that. And if you are a large complex of 500 units, do you have to hire an inspector to look at every single unit? That's really cost prohibitive, adding up over time. I mean, it's just another government level interference to deal with a problem that we do have laws on the books that can be addressed. Inspections, neighborhood inspections, tenants can turn people in whether they want to or not, or they're afraid to or not. I mean, it seems like there are other things that we could do without adding a whole nother level of bureaucracy that punishes the vast majority of landlords who are not problematic.
Well, thank you so much for your questions, Lucia. Really good ones. And so want to make sure that folks know that for large apartment complexes, we're only asking that 20% of the units are inspected. And so we're not asking for every single unit to be inspected. In Boulder's license program, they do require that every single unit is inspected. And we knew right off the bat that that was going to be way too burdensome, and we didn't want to do that. And so we chose the 20%. And we're not making any sort of assumptions about landlords or property owners. We know that there's egregious properties out there. We now have a mechanism within the city and county of Denver to address those through the residential home program within DDPHE. But we also don't know how many rentals we have in our city. And so this rental licensure program would allow us to get those numbers, to have people register and get that information. But in talking with our housing stakeholders, there is no mechanism currently to ensure that anybody who's renting in the city and county of Denver is aware that we even have minimum housing standards on our books in the city. And, you know, I think it's important that we have transparency with property owners around what our requirements are in the city. If you're going to rent property, that you need to meet those minimum housing standards. And quite frankly, we wanted to have some sort of teeth that if there was, for any reason, a property owner didn't want to comply or were renting a property that didn't meet those minimum housing standards, that we had a way to go back in and cure that instead of getting DDPHE involved, looking at, you know, minor violations and keep them working on the larger violations. And so, you know, not assuming in any way, shape, or form that everybody who rents property in Denver is doing something wrong or not caring about their tenants. We know that there's a lot of great, amazing property owners out there that help out their tenants, kind of give them leeway to support them. We're not making that assumption that there's, you know, kind of blanket bad actors out there, but we do want to get this data, and we want to make sure that we've got an ordinance that can support us in ensuring that property owners are complying with those minimum housing standards. So people have, you know, running hot water, they have appliances that all work, and just that the tenants are supported during this time.
Thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore. We have time for, I think, one more question. I want to encourage everybody on the list. I see Derek, you raised your hand now. I put you in the queue, but we are nearly out of time here. So we will make sure we get every question that's here in the chat to the office, and we'll make sure that we get the responses and that they get to you so that you can see them in total. And we are also going to have a live poll here at the end. Now that we're getting more savvy with our Zoom features, we thought we would try it out. It is an anonymous question, and it is going to ask if you are a renter, an owner, a landlord, or a landlord in an occupied, where you rent to somebody who lives within your own house. I'm just curious about those statistics. I believe, Adrian, you are next.
Thank you.
What happened to Carla?
We got her question in earlier. I asked it when she had put it in the chat. That was the first one with the slide.
Thank you, Matt, to all of you. My question is based on equity. And at the end of the day, rentals will pay the cost of this program, both the costs of the licensing, which seem at the moment to be low, but also the costs of the property improvements that the program will enforce, which are likely to be high. Has the equity impact on particularly the poorest renters be considered, in particular in terms of unhousing these individuals? Seems to me that a cost-benefit analysis needs to be done, the results of which I think would disadvantage those folks.
Oh, well, thank you for that question. And, you know, we very intentionally came into this process with an equity lens when we did this work. And we wanted to make sure that we were in no way, shape, or form encouraging any sort of displacement of folks who are renting. And so the way that this is crafted is that we want to, one, ensure that renters, most renters, if you look at the demographics, are folks that would most likely identify as a marginalized group potentially. And so people of color, folks that maybe, you know, haven't had the opportunities to secure home ownership. We know that there are decades and decades of equity issues around people of color securing home ownership. And so we have a disproportionate amount of people of color who are renting for a variety of reasons. And we want to ensure that when folks are renting, that they are living in a dwelling unit that meets our minimum housing standards. You alluded to a little bit in your question, you know, if somebody is a property owner and that they are renting, we also want to give them opportunities to cure any issues that might be identified that they were not able to successfully check off that housing inspection that would be required. And so we've created an amount of time in the ordinance for folks to cure. And hopefully, as we roll out this process, we will become more sophisticated in how we do this, because Boulder's program is very, very sophisticated. They have also layered on energy efficiencies and you know, some different indicators to ensure that properties are also, you know, environmentally efficient, et cetera. And we decided not to do that in the initial rollout of this program because we were concerned that that would make it too burdensome, but that there are also programs out there, both federal and state programs, that can help folks get their properties remediated or back up to par if they are renting those programs. And this would also give us an opportunity to support those folks who are renting properties that maybe are going to struggle with getting their property up to par. We want to fill that gap. And so we're trying to be very intentional not to create situations that would frankly negatively impact our communities of color, both from the standpoint of folks who are renting, but also people who are property owners.
Okay, so I thank you for all the questions. I see a ton of them. And thank you, Councilwoman Gilmore, so much, and Megan for coming today. Ian, can you put up the poll really quickly before we move to the next agenda item?
Oh, I think you're muted.
I think you're, yeah, Ian, you're muted.
Yep, here it goes now.
Ian, we're not seeing it. Is it up?
I think it pops up when I end it. We've had 30 of 39 people vote. So I was just,
It was up.
Oh, I don't see it.
I was just going to give it at least a minute, let everyone.
Maybe want to put it back up one more time.
I don't see it, but.
I don't know actually how to put it up again. This is the first time I've ever actually run a poll, y'all. As I was telling you, we were definitely trying to up our game here.
We'll practice for next time.
We've gotten 80% of the people in here have voted. So
yeah, if you end it, you can relaunch it or share results at the end. If you end the poll, it should
do you want me to relaunch it once more for you, Emmett? I will, just for the.
I already voted, so
Oh, you already voted.
If you had 39 votes, there's 41 participants. There's 2 people who didn't. You could just ask for whoever those 2 people are.
We actually only had 32 people vote.
Oh, 32. So you
I'll
have
launch it again
9.
really quick and we'll give it another 20 seconds.
Oh, I see. Brian just told me it's down at the bottom. I didn't see it.
Oh, this is great. Thank you for doing this.
So do we have to do it again?
No, don't vote twice. That's illegal in some places.
Oh, that's a funny joke.
Except in Chicago. Vote early, vote often, right? The saying goes.
All right, now we've had this is less votes. Are we sure you don't have to vote again?
Yeah, you have to vote again. He relaunched the,
Oh,
Yeah, everyone has to vote again.
sorry.
It's the whole thing all over again.
And then when you're ready to close it, you just hit, it should say end poll, and then it'll say share results. We just did our town hall last week and we mastered the polls.
Oh,
Yes,
did you?
They did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, fewer people have voted than last time.
I'm not even seeing it, so
I think you should end it so we can.
Yeah,
move
let's
on.
end it and we'll go with it when I'll share the results and everyone can see. And it didn't let me vote.
Or me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're a co-host or a host, you can't.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for bearing with us as we try new tech.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. And
You gonna
please reach
share
out
them?
to us with any questions.
thank you.
Thank you. Ian, are you going to share the results real quickly or should I move on?
I thought they popped up.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you can't see it because you're also a host. I'm not sure.
Okay.
75% owners, 14% owner renter. Is that what the name is? And I think it was 7% renters. I'm just going by memory.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to part 2 of our agenda. This is pretty good. We're only like 5 minutes late. And we have invited Tina Axelrad, the zoning administrator, and I see that she's on, and Abe Barge, who's a principal city planner, to come and talk about a huge text amendment that contains 160 fixes to the code. So if I could introduce Tina, and then will you switch to Abe when you're ready? How's that sound?
that sounds fine. Do I need to be promoted to be able to share my screen?
I think you can share.
Okay, I'm
Try it.
looking for that. So hello, everyone. Good morning. I come from you virtually from Snow Mountain Ranch. Behind me, that was a picture from January 2020, last time I was in the mountains. I'm not seeing how I.
The green square at the bottom.
Okay, I'm with you now. You can tell I don't do this very often. Abe Barge is here as well. Abe, say hello to the crowd.
Hello, everyone. How are you? I think Tina's going to do most of the talking, but I definitely want to listen in and hear what everybody has to say. And hopefully I can scramble in the background to figure out the answers to any technical questions. A lot of this is very technical, as you'll see.
Okay, so hopefully what you're seeing now is my
Yes.
slideshow.
We can see it, but there you go, presenter view, perfect.
Okay. So for those of you new to the committee, relatively new to the committee who haven't been on for more than a couple of years, every so often, CPD, I'm going to bring it up here. CPD does what we call basic code maintenance. The Denver zoning code obviously gets used every day, particularly by our development services staff. And I'm housed on that side of community planning and development. We've got planning services and we have development services. And so through the use of the code, we gather a lot of, gee, this isn't quite working very well, or gee, our outcome isn't quite what we expected. There's some confusion here about how the standard works or doesn't work. And we collect those. We collect every instance of staff coming to us and saying, hey, I think there's a fix that needs to be made in the interest of making the code work better on a day-to-day basis. So that code maintenance is occurring behind a curtain for most of a year. And every year to 2 years, it's been a little sporadic in how regular we do this, but usually not longer than every 2 years. We gather up all those suggestions, and some of it also come from customers who come in and say, hey, you know, I just noticed in laying out my project that this isn't working, that isn't working, or this isn't clear. And every 1 or 2 year cycles, we bring forward what we call artfully a bundle of text amendments that really focus on getting our code to work as best as it can on a day-to-day application. So these are generally corrections, clarifications. There might be some updates to zoning rules to catch up with changes in law or changes in circumstances. What it's not are major policy changes. No major substantive changes generally will make it into a bundle. We might get some minor policy tweaks where we feel it's a substantive change, but it's in keeping with adopted policy and as embedded in the code already. So the was supposed to say 2021. We started in 2020, but we're now in 2021. It includes about 160 of these types of corrections, clarifications, and some minor substantive changes. So here's generally for this particular package of amendments, what the focus has been on across those 160. Generally, there's a lot of correction of miscellaneous publication errors, typos, misspellings, incorrect cross-references. As you can imagine, in this very large code, we catch a lot of those as we actually use the code. There's also a sub-bundle of changes that really are focused on our sign code and its application day to day. We've been collecting a lot of those type of necessary changes that would have been caught up in past bundles. We thought we were going to be doing a whole update to the sign code. That's been pushed into the future a bit as other priorities have come surfaced up in our planning services division. So for this particular bundle, we wanted to make sure we really prioritize some of that cleanup to the sign code that we had been putting aside so people would do it all at once. So you'll see a bunch of sign code changes. And then what's unique about this bundle in terms of who did the drafting and who did the project managing, typically Abe Barge, Kyle Dalton, and their group of planners in our planning services division will take the lead on any text amendment. That is their wheelhouse, and they do that every day. Group living, residential infill, new zone districts for the Golden Triangle or Arapahoe Square. That's all typically drafted, researched, and done and managed through our planning services. Development services this time took the lead, and we had some great opportunity to engage with members of our residential permitting team to help with the bundle. And there's a wonderful architect on that team who turns out can draft code really well. And so since we had that resource, we did focus a lot of the bundle changes on what had come up and filtered up as to what wasn't working great, what needed clarification on our 1 and 2 family residential set of zoning standards. We still had some capacity, so we took on, beyond those first top 3s, some other higher priority clarifications and corrections that had bubbled up across our commercial zoning teams and our project teams. So I want to put a bit of a spotlight on a small handful of those bundle items that we feel the public would be particularly interested in. Given the time, Christine and Ian, if you, I sort of have lost track how much time I have. How much time should I take just to walk through this spotlight?
We have given you to 11:30, so that's 45 minutes for presentation and questions.
Okay.
Total.
And who really wants to say till 11:30? Raise your hand. No. All right. Well, then, I abhor a vacuum, so I will fill it with zoning stuff, because this is the Zoning and Planning Committee of INC. So you guys get to geek out with me this morning.
No, but
What's that? Okay.
You're on mute, Christine, and you're.
Christine, you're muted.
oh, you're welcome to go more quickly than that, because Ian is on after you to give an update on the new housing affordability.
Okay. All right. I'll spend a little more time on these first couple ones, accessory dwelling units, first three, and then I will probably whiz through the latter. I believe this presentation is available. Probably an important thing to note that I should have noted before is that one, the red line draft was posted yesterday to our website and kicked off a 30-day public review and comment period. So just got posted to our text amendment page on the CPD. So if you go to denvergov.org/zoning and click on text amendments, you can work your way there. In addition to the full red line, which because this touches a lot, pretty much every single article of the code when we do this type of code maintenance, it is the whole code up there with red lines. There's a lot of repetition. As most of you know, Articles 3 through 9 contain our zone districts and zone district specific standards, but there's a lot of repetition from article to article. So you'll see the same red lines in 3 through 9. We also have a detailed summary there. It's a 14-page article by article listing of all the bundle changes. So you can also maybe go to that first, hone in on what interests you, and then if you really want to see the red line, skip over to the red line. With accessory dwelling units, we've had a lot of experience over the last 10 years in administering these ADU standards, and they affect two parts of the code when you want to establish an accessory dwelling unit. They affect what we call the building form standards, which is your building envelope that is created by application of a set of setback, height, coverage, and other design standards. That's what we call the building form. And if you want to put your ADU in a structure that's outside of the main house, detached from the main house, we have a very specific building form set of standards called the Detached Accessory Dwelling Unit Building Form, DADU, for those who like acronyms. We made a few changes there based primarily on experience and seeing outcomes that were unnecessarily burdensome or internally inconsistent with other standards that did the same thing, and some minor policy changes in terms of reducing some barriers that were low-hanging fruit. So for instance, the first bullet, if you're building a detached structure to house your ADU, in some cases on much smaller lots, you had a bigger side setback for the detached structure with your ADU unit in it than you had for the main house. So that ended up causing a lot of issues. It didn't quite make sense. It seemed to be inconsistent with the primary, what you can do with a much bigger, more intense use. So we're now matching. If you have a 3-foot setback for your big house, you'll have a 3-foot setback for your detached structure housing an ADU. We also deleted the requirement for taller detached structures to be pushed to the southernmost side setback line. Again, more substantive change, but we weren't getting the outcomes that we had expected with it. It was causing a lot of trips to the BOA for variances that were being granted to be able to reuse existing structures to house ADUs, and given some of the policy direction and blueprint, we made that change. And then we had a whole bunch of standards in the building form table that were just inconsistent with other limitations that were trying to do the same thing in the code. And one of these was this having a maximum habitable space for the structure. And we're getting rid of that. We have three other standards that really get to more successfully controlling the scale and the size. So we'll just move to those. So that sums up the bundle changes to the building form that could house an ADU in a detached structure. In Article 11 of the Denver Zoning Code, we also have limitations on the ADU use. And there's a long list of those limitations. A lot of them are focused on when you have an ADU in a single unit zone district. But there was also, I think this was just an error, an unintentional outcome. We had this overly restrictive standard on the size of the accessory dwelling unit in terms of floor area when it was inside your main house. So you have a basement accessory dwelling unit. We've now come up with a substitute that we feel is much more realistic and gets us to the outcome of allowing a second accessory dwelling unit inside the main house. So that's the first bullet there. And then we clarified a number of existing limitations and prohibitions that our applicants were just tripping all over. We made clear that an ADU use is not allowed if you have more than one primary structure on your zone lot. So if you have a tandem house in the 2-unit zone district, you cannot have an ADU on that lot. If you have an old carriage house that you have taken advantage of a code exception that allows you to treat that carriage house like a second primary structure and a second primary single unit dwelling use on the zone lot, you cannot have an ADU in that carriage house. Only one ADU use is allowed as accessory to the same primary single unit dwelling use. You might say, duh, but we have carriage lots that are accessory structures and accessory uses on a carriage lot in the middle of a square block that are attached to a single unit dwelling use on the surrounding block. And they want to do an ADU both on the same zone lot as the main house and on their carriage lot. No, you can't, just one. And then we just make clear that the limitations on the size of the accessory dwelling unit are based on gross floor area. It just used the term area, and believe it or not, without those two other words, it caused a lot of trouble. We also have some changes that we qualify as an update based on better facts and science, and that's and data. That's changes to parking for affordable housing projects. As you all are very aware, affordable housing is a prime directive and policy priority for the city. And luckily, we had some great studies done and available over the last year that looked on the ground as to what the parking generation demand from more affordable housing projects were. And based on that, we're able to revise our parking ratio downward to enable a lot of these affordable housing projects that are affordable to households earning 60% or less of the AMI to pencil out better and be built and not have to overpark. These studies found that most affordable housing projects on the Front Range, not just in Denver, were so severely overparked they could have generated so many more housing units if they were right-sized. So that's what we're doing here. On the sign code, there was a whole number of cleanups. Nothing really dramatic has changed. A lot of this captured already existing practice in terms of us interpreting what we had and filling some gaps. But you'll see we have some new sign types that we've made more explicit in the sign code. This is really hyper technical stuff, but it makes a huge difference in our ability to apply our sign regulations. So I won't get into those too deeply. You can see these here, mostly definitions and adding types that we're missing. We have a whole host of other more minor substantive changes across the code. These next few slides just summarize them by article. Nobody looks at Article 1, but
Can I pause you? Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah, Ian.
We had a couple questions, Steve, Miles, and Christine, on ADU specifically, and I think maybe since you covered those slides and covered that topic, we might just stick with those in that space.
Yeah, I can't look at my slideshow and see who's raising their hand. So do you want me to start?
Yeah, I have a list of people who are going. It's Steve first, then Miles, then Christine on questions about ADUs.
Okay, let me go back to that slide so I can talk to it. So go ahead and shoot your questions there, and I'll do my best.
Steve, you there?
Hi, folks. I'm the chair of the BHNA zoning committee, and so one of the things we're doing in Baker is looking at an overlay to make the ADU zoning less restrictive, and it's not official BHNA policy at this point. It's a project in progress, but first of all, I've just skimmed the summary of these zoning changes last night, and I did notice there's quite a lot about ADUs, and it's going to take a while for us to understand it all with regard to what we're aiming at, which is being less restrictive. But I wanted to add one comment, which I think is close to the setback rule that you're already looking at changing, which is that when we looked at the setbacks for ADUs on the alley side, we know that garages don't have a setback if they have no door on the alley. And we felt like it didn't really make sense for ADUs to have a setback unless they have a door on the alley. And I guess, given Adrian's comment that the ADU changes look substantial, and I do think they do, maybe we should be looking at ADUs a little more broadly and breaking that out rather than doing it in a process like this. I guess, and I had some other comments about other sections that we haven't even got to, so I'll save those for later.
Okay. Abe can maybe jump in here. The bundle took on mostly those standards that were giving us trouble, or that were triggering a lot of trips to the BOA for variances that were predominantly supported and granted. We're not saying this is the whole universe of what we would do if we had full freedom to take on everything regarding how we regulate accessory dwelling units. That's really the focus of a different project. And so Abe, cue to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Steve. Those are really good questions. And we're wrestling with all of this, of course, too. And I know that you and the Baker folks have been working with my colleague, Josh Palmieri, on that overlay. So I know some of the things that you've been talking about. And we have adopted policy in the updated Blueprint Denver that says, it says some things about the availability of ADUs being more widespread. It also says that we should be looking at removing barriers that prevent their construction, like requirements that make it impossible to build them, while also at the same time making sure that we have standards that are based on a little bit more on the context in which they're built. So we actually are planning to undertake a project that looks at all of that comprehensively. We've been calling that the Residential Infill Project. It's probably going to get a new name. Its kickoff got delayed, probably looking at early summer of this year at this point. It's going to be a really big conversation, as folks are saying, like there's a lot to work through. So the things that are in the bundle here, as Tina said, really are the kinds of things that are sending people to get adjustments a lot that are really unclear, that are conflicting. But some of the things, like depending on your point of view, are a little bigger than others and are a slight policy shift. And we do include those kinds of things in bundles. So we're interested in, I think some folks will be happy with them. For the most part, they should actually get out of the way of ADU construction, but there's still plenty of other barriers that we'll need to look at with the project moving forward. And then I'm sure we'll get feedback about the changes going too far for a bundle. And I already see some of that in the chat. So that's a good thing to talk about.
And while Abe's project is going to be the more comprehensive look, it's also going to take a while. Okay, it's I don't know if they have an estimated overall time frame in which they hope to get from A to Z, but it's going to be
years.
Yeah, it's going to be a couple years. So meanwhile, as you all might know, particularly as we rezone more of the city to provide the entitlement to even have an ADU, we don't want to keep. We want to be able to do at least some changes that reduce the conflict and the pinch points during these interim years until we have that more comprehensive change and discussion with the community. Other questions? If we're ready, again, I can't see the chat, so I'm sorry, I'm not reading body language.
Miles had some, and I had one.
Yes, thank you, Tina and Abe. I think, yes, using Blueprint Denver as your basis for changing the policies, I can see basically removal of a lot of the limitations of the ADUs. But I think what's concerning is you're rolling this into, again, a major bundle of other things. And I'm very concerned about the ADU changes and you reducing setbacks and removing limitations on size and placement. And
we're not removing, we're correcting for the fact that we had a lot of overlapping standards.
Correct, but they were based on ordinances that were passed from the past. And you are modifying them to reach a certain goal. And so these changes, if I live next to somebody, a change from 5 feet to 3 feet, and then the changes to the size, removal of the limitations on size, can change the form dramatically of what can be built. And it looks like you're removing height standards as well. So
no, I want to be clear. There's still going to be 1.5 stories tall, which is what you can do today. And, whatever that is, the feet in height is not changing.
Feet.
There's still a setback.
So how are you going to show us what you've changed? Because these look quite dramatic. Are you going to do a study? Are you going to show forms of what the existing one was? It's like, what's the analysis here?
The analysis is this isn't a major change. That's
for me, who lives next door to somebody who can build a much larger ADU, it would be a major change.
They cannot build a much larger ADU. They cannot. I'm telling you that now.
I think Miles has a good point about just illustrating, though, which we can definitely do. We have those models, and as Tina's saying, the change is quite subtle, because I think another point is that the size standards that are being changed are overlapping size standards, and so there is still essentially the same limit on the size. The setback change from 5 to 3 feet on the smallest lots to match with the primary structure, that is a change that you'll see in the model, and so that's a great suggestion to include those.
But I think the bigger piece here is, again, these things are all being wrapped together, and I don't quite understand what you're proposing. And it may be very reasonable, but until you reach out and let us know what you're changing, it just makes me hesitant, because I'm not sure what's going to happen next door to me. And so again, this is that outreach piece and this process of rolling this in and then pushing this through. has me very concerned.
It's okay. Well, we're not pushing it through. We just published the public review draft yesterday. So we are just now entering the point in time where we're going to get that feedback. I think it's a great idea that and will help. And I appreciate the thought and Abe jumping in to show and illustrate what exactly the change would be. We have our marching orders in this whole bundle not to cross major policy lines. So there's nothing in here that, other than a reduction in the setback on the smallest lots, that's going to change the overall size of the structure that could be built next door to you. So if you happen to have a lot next door to you that's only 25 or 30 feet wide, which is, you know, maybe in Baker you might, but in a lot of other single unit zone districts or TU zone districts, you're not going to see much of that. Then, you know, that is a substantial change, and we'll take the comments and the input over the next, you know, months and see whether that flies or not. The size of the dwelling space inside the structure has never been regulated outside of the single unit and 2 unit zone districts. So the change there is we had a building form standard that talked about habitable space, and we had a use standard that talked about maximum gross floor area. And between the two, they didn't work well together, caused a lot of confusion, caused a lot of needless time churning to figure out how to make both work and have a project comply with both. In our professional opinion, the better standard to control for the scale and size of an accessory dwelling unit was the gross floor area limit in single unit zone districts. We also have other standards that get to the scale of the detached structure itself, including a footprint maximum, you know, where the building touches the ground. It can't be bigger. We don't have that same type of standard on your main house, but we do on a detached structure. And we also have a limit on how long any one side of that building can be. And then on top of that, we have the gross area limit on the use. So all combined, we felt removing a standard that caused a lot of needless stress and churning in the plan review cycle that didn't really gain us anything other than that pain and stress could be cleaned up, and no loss in policy or direction, and make that change as part of a bundle. Now, Abe's project might take a look at the outcome from these standards and have a discussion of whether the overall size is still right or wrong. We're not going there with this bundle. I hope that helps. But I'm happy to take more questions on it. And I like the idea of illustrating graphically, at least for outreach purposes, what the differences are. So thanks for that thought.
So Tina, I honestly didn't understand the slide. It's not up now, talking about the internal ADU. I'm very confused. I don't know how much time we can spend on this, but I'm very confused. So maybe.
Yeah. I can take a minute to try to explain that. And what happened in the code was there are some general limits on how much space inside your house you can use for any accessory use that is occurring inside the house. So you have a home business inside your house, there's a general limit on how large that can be. Because again, we're trying to distinguish between the main use of the house being for dwelling purposes and some subsidiary, incidental, accessory use also taking up space in that house. It can't overwhelm the primary use. The whole idea is that you've got a primary dwelling use and you've got something incidental going on, whether it's a dwelling unit or a home business, as two very typical examples. So we had a general standard that said no more than 20% or 300 square feet, whichever was bigger, could be taken up in your house for an accessory use. And that was a generally applicable standard that applied to all accessory uses. in 2010, when we added and expanded accessory dwelling units, we didn't think to revisit that size cap when it was inside the house, when it was a basement conversion, for example. And we were running into ridiculous and absurd results. When somebody had a 2,500 square foot home and they wanted to use more than 300 square feet for a attached accessory dwelling unit. We were needlessly sending people to the board, and it just didn't make sense. So we came up with a new standard when the dwelling unit is inside the house. It still gets to the point that it has to be secondary. It can't be bigger than the dwelling unit. And so we came up with a standard that matches essentially close to what you could do in a detached structure inside the house. So that's what that standard seeks to achieve, and why we abandon the general 20% or 300 square feet as it applies to accessory dwelling units inside the house.
Okay, I don't get it, because 75% of gross floor area of
So
primary.
if you've got a basement and a ranch house, and there's 1,000 square feet of floor area on each, you can put a ADU in your basement, but it can't be any bigger than 75% of the 1,000 feet that you're going to retain as your primary unit, or 864 square feet, which is the biggest we typically allow in a detached structure. So it's either going to be 750 square feet in your basement or 864 square feet in your basement, whichever is larger. So in this case, you've got a house with 2,000 square feet of gross floor area. That's not attic space. That's not crawl space. You can use up to 864 square feet in the basement to create an accessory dwelling unit. It's still going to be smaller than the 1,000 square feet you have as your primary dwelling unit. So it's still secondary, but it yields a usable and reasonable space for it's still a dwelling unit. Someone's still going to be living up there, and that's the maximum. You don't have to build something that big.
I just found 75% of gross floor area, the primary use.
Right. So you submit plans that show you want to keep the first floor as your primary dwelling space, and you want to convert your entire basement to an accessory dwelling unit. You wouldn't be able to take all 1,000 square feet of your basement and turn it into a dwelling unit. This would say it's the larger 75% or 864. 75% of 1,000 is 750. 864 is bigger, so you might be able to get to 864, but you're not going to be able to have 1,000 square feet.
Thank you.
Did that help?
Numbers aside, like the big picture here is that this is about removing an odd disconnect in the existing code, which is that you can build, in some cases, a bigger detached accessory structure in the back instead of just converting your basement and not building anything new at all. Like, we're very limiting about that, pushing you to build something new entirely, which might have more impact. And that just doesn't go with the intent of the standard. So it's fixing that.
Yeah.
If I could ask a question here, Tina, I hear you talking about for transparency and bettering community engagement. And I think if you could give us a log or show us in the documents on the website of how many times these instances were brought up, I think that would be interesting for us to see. So one of these changes caused a problem 4 or 5 times or 20 times, like it's hard for me to understand the importance of the code change without that context. And I think it could be good for everyone to see.
Ian, I can't do that. I'm really sorry. I can't. This is based on 10 years of experience from a professional review team that reviews hundreds of these across the years. And that's where this information is feeding from, but I don't have hard numbers for you.
There may be the possibility of
to a level that it was enough of a problem that it made a cut off of a list of 300 plus code changes that we had to figure out which could be put into a bundle.
There might be the possibility of, if we hear Ian or others, there's a lot of discussion about one or two particular things. We can probably find a way to follow up with some more information. Like, for example, the folks are asking questions about the Board of Adjustment and how many accessory dwelling units are going to the Board of Adjustment. And those are probably some statistics we could come up with.
Yeah. But remember, for every board case, there's probably 10 or 20 or more developers or builders or homeowners that just seek to comply and not take an extra trip to the board.
Sure, and I understand that, and I also understand that it's like relative. It's not a precise number, but even some sort of comparison. I could just, for some people asking, like, how many times does this come up, and is this one important or not?
Yeah,
I could just,
and I am relying on my professional plan reviewers who are there in the trenches every day. They went through what they felt would be the biggest bang for the buck in terms of the ADU standards causing these types of conflicts or lack of clarity or overlapping inconsistencies. So I do put a lot of credence and belief in them saying it's a problem. And we don't have a great system in place to generate that kind of data that you're asking for. Sure, we can look at board cases, but that's such a small percentage of the day-to-day work that we do. Again, I can't see anything, so are there more questions on the ADU uses, or should I wrap up, or?
Could you go to the parking?
And I'm gonna count on Abe. He's got a little bit more background that he can look at on the studies if people are interested, but no, these were generating a relatively high rate of frequency of trips to the BOA for parking variances.
So
we
this
don't
is a
get
case
many
where
we don't get many affordable housing projects in the city of Denver, but relatively speaking, the percentage of them that had to go to the board for a parking variance was very high compared to a straight up market rate residential project.
Yeah, and this is a case where, we have affordable housing, the few affordable housing projects that are coming forward that we're having to say no to permits. They say they don't need as much parking as we're requiring. And according to, a lot of studies that have been done, it looks like they're right. And, we want to make sure that we're not putting up a barrier that is unnecessary, that's preventing projects from happening.
Particularly when there's a lot of city financial participation in this project. There's a lot of political force behind these projects coming through in relation to the demand for this type of housing in the city. A trip to the BOA where we can't predict what the outcome is still can take 2 to 3 months to get through. And it's having some serious dire impacts on our ability to meet affordable housing goals in the city. So while this is substantive, it's also we wouldn't have done it without also having the utilization studies to support the change.
Okay, well, have you reached the end? I mean, I put some questions on parking in, but I think maybe I should talk about them with Abe afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, there's more slides. There's obviously a lot more changes than just the ADU sign code and parking changes. The slides, cherry picked a few from the articles to look at, but I can't even try to get through it all in 5 minutes. But again, there's a lot of cleanup and clarification. There's some changes in nomenclature and terminology that ended up being very confusing in practice.
One thing I might point out, just so that folks aren't alarmed if you really dig into the marked up draft of the code, that the term block sensitive setbacks comes out of the code, but the block sensitive setbacks, which apply, just about everywhere in low scale neighborhoods with a certain context, will still apply. Those rules apply. We're just sort of taking out a step in terms of how you get to the rules. And the building form tables will now say, go to this other section to see the rules. It's all going to be in one place. They're the same rules though.
Yeah, so that was more an exercise in simplifying the code. There were so many sort of look here, look there, look there. It was hard for customers to always catch everything. So that's that first checkmark bullet point there. But as Abe said, it didn't change anything in terms of the policy of tying front setbacks in our lower density zone districts to reference lots nearby.
Okay, there are a couple more questions. Steve has a question about notice. I wanted to make sure that the request for data, you said you might have a log of 300. Make sure that if there is some kind of log, we can get it. And then Wendy Rioche has a question. Well, it's sort of a rhetorical question. Okay. So did you want to ask your notice question, Steve?
Sure, thank you. So in reading through the summary of changes, I noticed that overheight fences will no longer be, was it a Z-pin or a different one of the informational notices? And I may have missed some other changes to notifications for all I know, because like I said, I just skimmed it last night.
Mm-hmm.
The implication in the summary was the reasoning behind that removal of the informational notice was that there weren't a whole lot of comments being received by administrators in response to those. I don't know if that's the case. It's kind of the implication in the comment in the summary. If that's
Right.
I just want you folks to know that we review those and we have commented on some of them, but we appreciate them even if we don't comment on them. So I hope that it's not that the city is not assuming that when they don't receive a comment that there's no value to the informational notice being sent. And I don't understand how that met the standard that you outlined in the beginning of the presentation of what belongs in a bundle. It has to be high priority. It seemed to be in order to be included, and I can't see where the priority is there. What is it, how much hassle is it to send out a Z-pin? It's information you already have, and you have a system, I assume, that makes it easy to send a Z-pin to the right geographically located area. And frankly, one of my big beefs is that there's so much information that the city doesn't share and could share perhaps more effectively in a different format. For instance, if you had a way to subscribe by a geographical area to all notices rather than having to be an RNO. But given that the RNOs are now the way that those kind of that information is shared, given we have that structure, I can't see the reasoning for removing a Z-pin unless there's something else beyond what I'm taking as an implication from the summary.
Yeah, and I apologize. I realize I don't have that on my Article 12 summary, but you are absolutely right. We did a study and analysis of all our overheight fence permits over the last 3 to 5 years to get a sense of what, to sort of weigh the cost benefits of providing the notice and the actual outcomes in terms of whether the permit was approved with conditions, or denied. And that was being done, Steve, across the board in the context of the economic recession that we're in. We lost a lot of staff, and we are so lean and trim that while we're very efficient in what we do, we did look for opportunities to reduce the amount of processing that occurs on the inside of the house, as well as the impact on the customer who has to wait for that processing to be done. And so we did a very thorough study of essentially a cost benefit analysis before we took the step of making that change. So as you can probably guess, the outcome was that we were not getting comments. The comments we got were fairly consistent with the standards that we had to mandate anyway on the applicant to follow, and that the approval rate was very high with no conditions. So that to us signaled an opportunity to reduce the amount of resources that we had to spend, both the applicant and internally, I will admit, without seeing a lot of benefit from the process. And that truthfully is why that change is in there.
Okay, well, I just want to say that there's a benefit that you may not realize, which is that we in our neighborhood organization actually really benefit from hearing about that, because not only does it tell us about a specific case, but it helps us understand the process and help other neighbors with the process and tell them what they need to do, or whether they're likely to get approval, or why something is happening that they see across the street from them. It's not just what happens in the city that the administrative process is benefiting. It's us out here. And I'd just like to add another plug that if it's an overhead that you feel is excessive, then I would strongly suggest that you move to another way of opening up your data, rather than saying you have to figure out which RNOs get a notice about which administrative reviews. Why not just make all administrative reviews on an open data platform that can be accessed with an effective search? It's
well,
something that
I love that idea. We don't have that technology.
That technology would save you money, I believe. And that's all I have to say. I just,
okay. I love the idea of having an open data source on our permit database. We have, but we don't, it's never been tried or asked for, so I don't really know how to respond.
There are examples in the world outside. I would use RSS as the means of access, and there are so many systems out there that do that already. And I could talk separately. I've been making the point elsewhere, so I'm not going to belabor it here. But thank you.
It's a good point,
remember,
Steve.
we're
So
the public sector.
Thanks for making it. And I also want to point out that the bundle, these proposals have been made by the planning staff, and Tina talked a lot about the reasoning. But we're now putting it out there for a what do you think and reality check. And we're hearing from you, Steve, that there's a real benefit that we haven't quantified about that VPIN. And so definitely interested in hearing that comment and whether other people feel the same way, because that's what phase of the project we're in now, is considering that input.
Yeah. So I'm sharing the web page where you can see, once you get to the text amendments. This is under code maintenance bundles, and the summary of the proposed changes is there, as well as the full red line draft. And I do want to go back to the schedule, if possible. Oops. Oh, there's the draft. Sorry. I've lost my, I'm going to stop.
We're still seeing the presentation mode.
Oh, are you?
Might need to reshare.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll put that link in the chat again too.
Yeah.
I would suggest starting with the summary. The marked up text amendments are always difficult, and this one in particular, because there's so many small things, is a challenge to get through. So that the summary is a good place to start for understanding the big picture and making comments.
And I think I've shared the schedule. So we're just at the beginning of the public review and comment step. We encourage the RNOs as a body to definitely provide comments, but individuals can, and we'll collect them and go through them. And we have an information item at Denver Planning Board. It's essentially the same presentation this coming Wednesday. And gosh, I think I feel like I have like an older version of this because this was changed to March 26th, given that we didn't get it posted till yesterday. Right now we have target dates for public hearings at the planning board. And of course, that's all dependent on the public comment and review comments that we get. But we're hoping to get to the planning board on April 21st, which would then put us at an ultimate adoption hearing on June 14th.
Okay, well, this is very useful, Tina and Abe. I haven't had a chance to look at it, and I see a lot of questions, people who wanting data. You said, you did a cost benefit analysis before removing some of the ZPIN notices. I would like to see that. I'd like to see the parking analysis. There's a number of things that were requested. So I think maybe Ian and I can put some of that in a letter.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. I know Abe was trying to take notes. I couldn't take notes and talk at the same time. So, and there's a lot in the chat, I see. So that would be great.
But I raised the same question about the complete, this stuff slips by in tables. You eliminated all the ZPIN notice in the group living. And it's really hard to discuss in a public meeting because a lot of people don't even know what that is. But I can attest that I went when, what's his name? The guy who went to NDRC, Kelly Lead was in charge of development services. We were making this request that anybody be able to tap into a central resource and see notices. And Jeffco does it. There's other places that can do it. I think I agree with Steve Harley that this really needs to be thought of rather than just looking at, oh, CPD is in a bind and we don't have staff and we don't have money. I agree. We do look at those things. We may just not oppose everything, but we do read these carefully. So I think there's some follow-up, but I really appreciate you coming to us.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of voices to consider too. Obviously, RNAs are an important voice that we listen to very, very closely and intently. We also have the voice of the customer, and we have the internal voices as well, and good governance and everything else that's out there. So we're balancing a lot of demands on, greater efficiencies and turnaround times for our customers, as well as notices and the level of scrutiny that something gets for a fence versus a use, can be very different. And we're trying to, certainly reserve the ZPIN process for where we have a lot of very site-specific issues that play out with a particular project or use. And those are extremely helpful. But I will tell you very candidly, where we don't see a lot of benefit from having that level of scrutiny because the type of project, the type of structure, the type of use lands in different places in virtually the same way, and we can address it through design standards or development standards to anticipate any adverse impacts. We will tend in Denver. That's the overall balancing of those perspectives that we've done historically.
I do hear you. I hear you. Yeah.
I would love, Christine, to have a map that you could go to and click on a property and see everything that's going on, or click on your own house and see all the notifications that pertain to that. We're inching in that direction, and there are more and more features available all the time. I just noticed recently that you can now, on the Acela Citizen Access Portal, which you can get to from our website,
Yeah.
at least larger development projects, you can find out all kinds of things about them on there now. And so this is a big technical project that needs to happen, but definitely agree.
That, I think at the level of our site development plans, which are the bigger projects in the city, 1 and 2 family development, I mean, the pure volume of what we get in Denver compared to other jurisdictions is quite remarkable. And we do our best for the average homeowner who goes through our permitting process, who are not sophisticated builders and developers. We do try to make that path easy for a whole host of number of good reasons. You know, when you yourself want to do an addition or put up a fence or put an air conditioning unit in, you know, we do try to make that path be the path of least resistance. We think that's good business for the city. So we are balancing quite a bit here, but I hear you. I mean, if we hadn't seen the pattern we saw with overheight fences, it wouldn't be on here. Oops, you're on mute again, Christine.
Okay, we didn't even touch overheight fences, but why don't we wrap up? And I think maybe all the people that are attending today can take a good look at the summary, and we will get you some questions maybe before planning board, or get questions to.
Yeah, we'll answer the questions whenever you get to them. Now, you know, this project was taken on by a team of development service planners who have their day jobs. So a lot of this was done nights and weekends. And so responding to comments might take a while, but I will probably be doing them myself. And I do have a day job, so I'll do my best. And we'll try to get information to you as soon as possible.
Okay, well, thank
I'll
you
help.
both. So, Abe, did you want to say something else?
Just that I'll help. Yeah. Send your questions. Don't be shy.
Okay.
Don't be shy.
I have one follow-up question quickly. I put it in the chat. When you go to the informational presentation for the planning board, will you be going through every single item? So like the ones we weren't able to get to, or you're going to just summarize it quickly and have them read it as well?
Probably given the time that we have for informational items at planning board and the fact that we were there in October as well. I mean, I hope to get through all the slides because typically they let us do that before opening it up for questions. But I know it's a pretty packed agenda that night.
Okay. And you said you had a presentation in October. I'm just trying to put together like links for my own members so that they can follow along, you know. Cool.
You're trying to put together what? I'm sorry.
Links so that they can watch it. So they can watch this meeting. They'll be able to watch the planning board meeting. They'll be able to watch the one in October. Not everybody wants to read through everything and they would prefer to listen to you over and over again, Tina.
Oh God, I don't know why.
That'd be great, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, if we need to come back in March to your meeting, you know, we can do that too. Give you a little time to absorb and get some questions answered in between. But if there's some real sticking points that a face-to-face would be better with the committee members, you know, we can do that too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, and everybody, I know we're at time, but stay on just for 5 or 10 minutes so Ian can give an exciting update on the Housing Affordability Initiative.
Yeah, so thanks everyone, and thanks again to everybody for A, sticking around, B, to all the speakers who are here. These rental registries and these code changes do impact every single one of us, and it's wonderful to see delegates, people from all across the city are here today, so that's great. I'm sorry we don't have time to do around the city. We are really trying to figure out how to at least do that quarterly so that we can get updates from each other. Fortunately, March would be in the first quarter still, so stay tuned for that. Basically, you know, I've been sitting as an INC representative on the height incentive, zoning incentive task force. It was meeting last year, even through the pandemic, and they've now reached a critical point in where they want to switch gears and not just focus on that as the only tool to seek affordable housing. And so now it's changing to a more of a broader affordable housing incentive group. They do have a pretty rigorous outreach schedule that puts this towards the end of next year. Who knows, maybe with delays into early next year. Hard to say at this exact moment. What I did make clear was a very concise and clear calendar early of when you are meeting, the possibility of coming to INC regularly over the next 10 months to really be having this conversation could do a lot to build goodwill and to also really channel our feedback into this critical issue that our committee and INC has really dedicated itself to over the last few years. You know, Christina and I have really tried to bring forward different perspectives about housing, from the Village Collaborative to 9 to 5 to renters' rights, the warrant of habitability, same things we're hearing with this rental registry. And so the three topics that are going to be as part of this is the linkage fee, inclusionary housing, and still remaining this this height incentive zoning that exists now. And really what I heard the change was, and we brought this up last year, that there was likely to be state bills, state actions taken to allow inclusionary housing to, for rental properties. And at first it was a bill that was going to do much more comprehensive rent control overhaul. And after 3 years, I think this will be the third year it's coming back, they've decided to go just for the carve out on this local control for inclusionary housing, so that our own planners and our own city council and mayor can make decisions about placing that also into rentals as they do into ownership buildings. And pardon me, that's my grandmother talking to her dog in the background. Grandma, I'm in a meeting. She said, okay. All right. Sorry about that, y'all. And sorry if you hear her little dog in the background. Lost my train of thought there for a second. Oh, so we're expecting a bill on inclusionary housing. It is called House Bill 21-1117. I am putting it here in the chat for those who want to follow along. I had a conversation with 9 to 5's lobbyists earlier today, and they said that it has been introduced. We're likely to see it scheduled in the next 10 days. And then it could move very quickly. We're not really sure at the speed at which it's moving. You know, I think we've talked over the years about whether or not we wanted to come forward and be supportive of inclusionary housing. And I'm wondering on what timeline perhaps we could move to get INC support for inclusionary housing, talking with the planners, talking with council members, and following this for the last 3 years. It could really change a lot of the tools that are available to us, from just strictly market-based solutions to actually requiring them to build housing as part of their trade-offs, which we've been advocating for. And so I'm hoping, and I've talked to Loretta about this, about how we can line that up or move in those directions, but it could mean a lot and be very powerful for our Denver legislators who are in the House and Senate who are working to pass this legislation. The timeline for this, as I mentioned, is through the rest of the year, and their first meeting is Tuesday, next Tuesday from 4 to 6. And they will have public comment at every single one of the meetings that they're having. They've also suggested listening sessions, Facebook Lives perhaps, and greater training, outreach materials and expectations for those people who are participating as members. You know, it goes beyond just, we're bringing it here and that's part of us doing our part, but whether it be surveys and expectations, it's just something that we've talked about for a long time. And I think, you know, I don't want to find myself in a situation for INC once again at the end saying, why is it that the outreach to people of color is X? This is unacceptable. And this is the 5th or 6th time that we've ended up in this situation. And INC has had to make those claims repeatedly, going back to Blueprint Denver and before and after. And so really just trying to work with the city to improve their engagement process. I do want them to come back regularly, over perhaps bi-monthly is my initial conversation with them, to just make these presentations, to engage you themselves, and to perhaps do a little bit more of the lifting in addition to us doing a little bit more lifting. So those are the updates that I have for you now.
Can I just ask, I mean, it sounds like, you know, for us to give some sway, some support, I mean, and initially right now, it sounds like that's the timing that it would be helpful for now.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if a board letter in the interim could do something to Denver legislators and representatives or the caucuses now that it has been introduced. Or perhaps at the very minimum, Loretta, you could reach out to the sponsors to have a conversation with them on behalf of INC. I think that that could be useful. And then,
And-
you know, we don't know the calendar at this point. So it could move in 5 weeks, it could move in 10 weeks.
Well, and I know that one of the sponsors is our representative. And I know Julie, so Gonzalez. So I could reach out to both of them. But I want to put this out there, and I could put this out there as a proposal to, ZAP and those attending now is, I could move that we support the inclusionary statute that's being proposed.
I'd like to say something because although I do agree with what's going on at the state level, Loretta, you yourself have been very careful to hold back us taking positions.
Well, this is about inclusionary housing, so.
Let me finish.
Okay.
And I think that if we're mainly going to be educational and informational and enabling RNOs, which is kind of the emphasis I've heard over the last 6 months or so, that we need to be careful here. That's all I'm saying. And maybe get information out and let RNOs, but developing a statement out of just hearing Ian's presentation today, I think would be overreaching and might not be something our members would choose to do.
Oh, so let me just go back and say, what my understanding is, we want to make sure that we have inclusionary housing and that we support people with affordable housing. If that's not what you think, let me know that.
Okay, well, personally, I do. I haven't read the bill. I just think we need, as an organization, to represent the member RNOs, and we've had this discussion. And
okay.
Christine, if I may jump in, I do think we have basically had this presentation given to us by 9 to 5 Colorado before last legislative session when this was coming forward. It's exactly the same thing, just pulled out as the one piece. I'm not saying that justifies that's due diligence in going through what it does. Maybe a compromise could be to get some of a special session or something together where we have the sponsors of the bill come talk to us if we like. And if we bring something out of committee, it doesn't necessarily mean all the members are going to do it. It just means that our committee is recommending it to the larger board, and it sets it on a timeline for that. And I've seen issues come up with very little input and full presentations as you're describing and still make it forward to the next stage.
Yes, that has happened. I'm just, I'm kind of speaking to INC's reluctance to really take a stand on group living other than to, what we did in the summer, and we didn't go forward. So I think we need, as an organization, to discuss it. So, and I definitely think it's very important, and I think it probably will make it through this session at the state level, but INC's, we need to look at our mission statement. So.
Well, I'm not so certain about it making it through. Just in my legislative experience and working at the Capitol, it has been many years in a row that we thought this was going to go through, and the powerful landlord associations in particular, in this case developers, this is more targeted developers than the other rent control work, has blocked it.
Well, you saw some of the pushback Abe was referencing just on, or someone was referencing just on the rental registry from business interests. So I do anticipate similar pushback.
I just put in for everyone to read just specifically, I just copied and pasted. So it just says the bill clarifies that the existing authority of cities and counties to plan for and regulate the use of land includes the authority to regulate development or development. So it's giving cities and counties, that option. the provision of the state rent control statutes do not apply to the land use. So that's kind of where it is. So that's the overview. So I just want to make sure people see that.
Thank you. And I do understand it's really giving municipalities the option to then move forward. I do understand that. I feel like if this was going to be on our agenda, we should have announced something like this was going to be on our agenda. And I thought we were just getting an update from Ian, not making a decision to move ahead on a state initiative. So I guess I would not urge us to move forward today.
Well, I don't think, Christine, the intent was to bring it forward now. Correct me if I'm wrong. What I heard from Loretta was this is moving in the next 2 weeks. We've been talking about this for a long time. She believes it fits into what INC has been advocating for over the years. And I think that's why she was asking to bring it forward.
I see Adrian wants to say something.
Yes, Madam Chair, or Madam and Mr. Chairs, however you like to be talked about. I think that the example of our group living in action is a powerful argument for us as INC to make our voice heard prior to this vote as a matter of urgency. I'm not sure how that voice will go, but I think it's critically important that we as a group are available and on record. And so I would encourage, and it's very late in the day to do this, but I would encourage a motion and would propose a motion that goes to the membership or to the board at this late stage in favor of this local government promotion of affordable housing units.
Motion.
Emmett, I believe, is saying he's seconding it.
Yes.
So, okay, so that would trigger a discussion then. Adrian, would you mind doing us a favor and either typing in a Word document or typing in the chat your exact motion?
Yeah, I'll
So I feel this should have been on the agenda. And Ian, if you knew you were going to discuss the state 1117 bill, then it should have been on the agenda. So
I believe that it's included in the agenda because we're talking about the new affordable incentive tools and they're the same. They're in the same. That's the new tool that they're adding, but only if the state passes this rule. And they're doing it in anticipation that it may.
well, I just don't like the way it was done. So, Gertie? Gertie, we can't hear you.
I see Joel, your hand up. I'm going to do my best to keep a log of this.
Gertie, we can't hear you.
I know. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I understand Chris's concerns completely. To me, the distinction is here. This is not a zoning code amendment. This is legislation that will allow the local municipalities to make their own decisions. And that to me is a significant distinction. And I would support the motion.
Joel?
I think Gertie said that very well. Right now, Denver can't even consider many types of inclusionary housing. And so just simply removing the limitation so that Denver can begin the process of considering and the trade-offs and the extent to which, and then we'd be at the table for that, I think is very important. And I think in spirit, although we haven't considered this bill before, in spirit, this is very in keeping with many positions INC has taken in support of affordable housing. So I personally truly wish that this passes at the state so we can have the conversation at the city. And as a delegate, I'll vote in favor of the motion.
Miles?
Yeah, this is more of a side comment. And it's understanding this process. And I agree with you, Christine, about the process and how this is handled and how this has been handled in the past. At the last meeting, we had a motion on the table that was summarily tabled because there was no time to discuss it about the group living. And now we're having these other things, preferential treatment. While I support the city reviewing this and having that option, I'm more questioning the process and how this is being handled, because it seems certain things are being passed through the committee, whereas other things are being held up. But again, I do support this changing and this proposal. So it's just a question of process and procedure for ZAP.
Thank you. David?
I'm not a delegate, but I just also wanted to express my support as, a member of Honey and a member of INC for INC to support this moving through at the state level.
Okay, are there other comments? I would just like to point out we're way down on attendance at this point, and people might have stayed if this was going to be a discussion. It's a huge topic, and I feel it should have been on the agenda, but is there anybody else with their hand up that I'm not seeing?
Hi, this is Tess. I am also not a delegate, but I would just like to also support the move for INC to support the state bill. And I think we've been doing a lot of housing work in the community, and there's just, as it stands, the city's, options that are being provided as alternatives to affordable housing they're just not meeting the needs of the community and the housing crisis that we have right now. So I would just ask that INC support it.
Ian and Christine, apologize for barging in. I may have caused confusion here by saying as a delegate I will support this. It's been clarified by Ian in the chat, and it's consistent with practice that I think anyone attending a committee meeting can vote. And I'm sorry if I caused confusion by raising the delegate status.
No, I do realize it's not a delegate vote. So I think I'll call the question. I'm opposed because of the process and the way this was done this morning, which I'm very disappointed in Ian and Loretta for not talking to me about this and getting this on the agenda. But let's just call the question and vote. Unless there's other comments.
No, the question's been called, so let's do it.
So,
I just launched a poll, Christine. Can you see it?
no, it says poll number 1, edit.
Okay, well, I'll record yours as a no, and I can't vote, and mine is a yes. Just a few more yet. So right now we have 23 of 26 voting. 24. 25. Is anyone not voting at all that we should know that's not even voting abstain? That would help me know. Now we're there. Okay. So what I have on my screen here is with mine 18 yeses, with Christine's 5 no's and 3 abstentions. Is there anybody who needs to abstain on the record? And then please remember I added mine and Christine's because we weren't able to vote. Okay, it passes 18-4 to 3.
Okay.
And Madam Chair, may I thank Ian for his diligent work in this area. This has been a very important issue that, in my far from humble opinion, we have under considered at INC. Thank you, Ian.
Yes, and I have joined with Ian on some of that work on the Affordable Incentive Committee. And I do understand the issues, but again, it's a process issue. So I think INC has to actually have some very robust discussion about process. All right, well, so that will move forward. And is there anything else that people would like to bring up that we didn't cover today? No. Gertie, did you have something?
Yes. When will we hear any updates on the changes to the marijuana ordinances?
That's a really good question. The reason we took that off the agenda was because we had 2 full items. And I think we can have Erica or come back anytime we would like to INC, but in terms of changes to the current draft, I think that Excise and License feels that it already made an enormous amount of changes based on input from the January 6th and January 8th meeting. And I don't know if there are going to be any more changes, but we can find out what happens at council.
When will I missed the last meeting where this was discussed. And as I try to go through the various recordings of what's available, I keep coming back to the same thing. My understanding was there were significant changes after the first presentation at Inc., whether it was Inc. ZAP or Inc. Delegates, I can't remember.
No, the significant changes were after 2 public meetings on virtual meetings, January 6th and January 8th, and comments that were not through Inc. and were not through ZAP. They were Excise and License that announced on December 22nd that it was having 2 public meetings, January 6th and January 8th, over Christmas. So that was somewhat problematic. By the time they came to us at the delegate meeting in February, they had just released the updated changes 3 days before that meeting, and people hadn't really looked at them. So there were a lot of questions, good questions, but we decided we didn't have the bandwidth to do any more input collecting today.
So that presentation at the February
delegate meeting
is the final thing that's going to, has gone or is going to the finance committee or whatever committee it goes to?
Yeah, I guess it's possible that Erica made some further, that Excise and Licenses made some further changes based on the delegate questions, but I do not know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else, let's say goodbye, and we'll see you all at the awards ceremony and the elections on March